It's Wisconsin Today. I'm Rob Farrett.
And I'm Kate Archer-Kent. President Trump issued an executive order this month directing federal agencies to increase timber production and exclude projects from environmental reviews.
That could have an impact on the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest in Wisconsin, which is already one of the top timber-producing national forests in the country.
The Environmental Law and Policy Center is among the groups concerned about the order. Senior policy advocate Andy Olson told WPR it's a harmful combination with Forest Service staffing cuts.
There'd be even less opportunity to police and enforce standards for forest protection by staff.
We're checking in on the environmental and business impacts on Wisconsin's logging industry, as well as a Trump administration threat of tariffs on lumber.
Danielle Kading is a reporter covering the environment and northern Wisconsin, based at WPR's Superior Bureau. Danny, welcome back to Wisconsin Today.
Thanks for having me on.
So what exactly does this executive order from the Trump administration do? How does it clear the way for additional logging projects here in our state?
Yeah, so the order directs federal agencies to do a number of things. President Trump is asking the secretaries for the Departments of Interior and Agriculture to submit a plan that sets a target for the amount of timber sold each year on federal lands. And he's also asking for updated guidance to boost logging through agreements or contracts with states and other groups. And he wants agencies to take steps to make it easier to log under federal laws that protect endangered species and the environment.
So what have you heard around Wisconsin? What have you learned about how this executive order could affect Wisconsin forests?
Yeah, it's not super clear how this could affect federal lands or the Chequamegon-Nicolet in Wisconsin, but we do know that close to 10% of Wisconsin's roughly 17 million acres of forest land is federally owned. And the Chequamegon-Nicolet is Wisconsin's only national forest. It spans about 1.5 million acres across northern Wisconsin. So there's concern among environmental and conservation groups that this would be kind of a return to clear cutting of the past. But the industry says that this could be a benefit for forest health.
Yes, we heard in the president's executive order sound forest management and the U.S. becoming more self-reliant. If ramping would ramp up here in Wisconsin, would the U.S. become more self-reliant in the logging industry?
That is a good question. I think it's kind of hard to guess. We know that Canada is a top supplier of lumber to the nation. They make up almost half. So it kind of depends on the capability of the mills and the workforce to handle any increased logging.
And Danny, what is this relationship between the state of Wisconsin and the federal government when it comes to managing our state's national forest?
Yeah, so roughly a decade ago, or in 2015, the state and the Forest Service signed what's called a Good Neighbor Authority agreement, and that allowed the state to help manage the Chequamegon-Nicolet, and that included timber sales. And so the state's been managing an average of 25 million board feet of timber each year under that deal. But there's a question over whether the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources could help any more than it already is. And the Chequamegon-Nicolet is already, as you said, one of the top timber producing forests.
We're talking about Wisconsin's logging and energy industries as the Trump administration seeks to roll back environmental protections. We have WPR reporter Danielle Kading, who covers the environment. Danny, part of the support for increasing timber production is concerns over wildfires like the ones that we saw devastating California earlier this year. Can you make that connection for us? How more logging could reduce wildfire risk?
Yeah, well, President Trump and logging advocates say, if you cut more timber, then there's simply less that could be fuel for wildfires. And in our state, they've pointed to diseases like emerald ash borer that have decimated trees or extreme storms that have caused blowdowns. And they're basically saying that that's just leaving more deadwood that's vulnerable to, going up in flames. But scientists have long said that it's not poor management driving these wildfires, but drought conditions and extreme heat from climate change.
And so, if we're clear cutting forests because of some of this executive order, would that also have an impact here on Wisconsin's environment and the potential for wildfires?
That is a good question. I mean, if you're cutting more timber in the forest, there's going to be less there, right? But I mean, the Forest Service already conducts prescribed burns to
Hmm.
try and keep a handle on that.
The season
In
is
fact, they just
underway. Yep.
yeah, they just announced that recently. And so I think there's this kind of this approach of, wanting to keep everything in balance, right? You have the goal of trying to, produce a lot of revenue from timber sales on the forest. But then you also have these goals of maintaining an ecological balance and protecting the environment, water quality, wildlife habitat. And so you're trying to kind of balance all these different factors together when considering, management, including for wildfires.
You mentioned Canada being a leader in logging, largest supplier of lumber to the U.S. And you talked to the head of Kretz Lumber in Antico, which is a global supplier, specializes in premium northern hardwood lumber. And Kretz president Troy Brown is concerned about the possibility of retaliatory tariffs on lumber that they export.
That is where our product ends up being tariffed by the consuming country, and they have to then absorb a higher cost for our product.
How are companies like Troy's navigating this uncertainty over tariffs?
I think businesses right now are just trying to do the best they can with these on again, off again tariffs. The uncertainty has certainly caused lumber prices to fluctuate up and down. So, since we saw the introduction of these tariffs beginning in February, and then they were paused, and then they were introduced again, and then paused again. And so, some lumber groups say companies are dealing with hoarding by customers or delayed orders, and all of that volatility can just affect the cost of materials for home construction. And the
Mm.
National Association of Home Builders projects that uncertainty has caused costs to go up more than $9,000 per home. So that's not good news for people looking to buy since prices were already high.
So, with this, the president's executive order is a directive. What are you watching for next with Wisconsin's logging industry?
Well, tariffs on Canada could
Hmm.
resume in early April. So that could certainly have an effect on the industry if Canada slaps on more retaliatory tariffs because more than half the state's wood products go to Canada. And, between 800 and $900 million is exported each year in terms of wood and paper products to that nation. And, as far as the order, Trump wants federal agencies to issue updated guidance by April as well on tools to ramp up logging. So I
Mm.
guess we'll see what they say then.
You have also been writing about the Trump administration rolling back environmental protections for air pollution. Are those changes a similar way to the executive order on forests, or is this a different approach here?
Yeah, so this one comes from Trump's new EPA administrator, Lee Zeldin, and it's part of around 30 rules that the agency is rolling back. And I guess the similar thread here is that these moves were made with benefiting the economy in mind rather than protecting the environment. Zeldin has said that these regulations put in place by former presidents Joe Biden and Barack Obama have suffocated the nation's economy. But supporters say, it's strengthening public health and reducing damages from climate change.
And can you remind us of the energy mix here in Wisconsin and how could those EPA pollution rollbacks affect energy production?
Around a third of the state's energy mix is from coal.
Hmm.
And that's according to the most recent federal data. Around 43% is natural gas. And so what we've been seeing is, utilities have been taking part in the clean energy transition. They're trying to shift away from coal to other sources like wind and solar, but they've delayed those plans. We've seen utilities like the Energies and Alliant Energy delay plans to close coal units, and they're pointing to growing energy demand from things like data centers and concerns about the reliability of the grid. So if they keep these coal or natural gas resources on as part of their power mix longer, we're going to see more share of the state's carbon emissions or greenhouse gas emissions coming from burning fuels to produce electricity.
And these changes are also affecting vehicle emissions. You've also reported on the Trump administration pausing federal funding for EV infrastructure, and Governor Evers putting pressure on Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy to release that funding. Where does all of this leave Wisconsin's EV industry and the future of these charging stations?
Well, in kind of the same situation as the lumber companies, I guess it's just a lot of uncertainty, right? I mean, for EVs right now, that's over funding, over projects. Wisconsin was set to receive a total of more than $78 million in federal funding for charging stations. They stand to lose out on roughly, I think it's 55 or 56 million that the state had yet to receive. So that places all of these projects that were going to receive those funds, which were going to go to private businesses, that puts them in limbo.
As we close out here, you talked with this physician who told you that the relaxing of pollution standards would save power companies some money, but it's Wisconsin residents who would ultimately pay. What is meant by that?
I'm sorry, Kate. Could you say that again?
Oh, you had talked with a physician who had said that, relaxing these standards, ultimately it's Wisconsin residents who are going to pay the price. Is that to health? Is that to something else?
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. I think what they were talking about is that they're going to end up paying in terms of their health. We've seen some of the costs of these regulations. I think it was like roughly $19 billion that the American Lung Association said that if we shift to like zero emission transportations, we could save that much in terms of health benefits. So you might pay related to your utility bills, or you might pay related to your health, and it's kind of maintaining a balance between those two as to how can we, maintain our economy while also protecting people's public health.
Danny, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Kate.
Danielle Kading is a WPR reporter covering the environment in northern Wisconsin, based at the Superior Bureau.
Coming up on Wisconsin Today, Waupun Prison could become a vocational village under a plan from Governor Evers. Michigan pioneered these programs in the skilled trades.
These programs do make a difference. They give people the necessary skills to be able to go out and find a job and keep a job.
Job readiness after prison, that's ahead on WPR News.
It's Wisconsin Today. I'm Kate Archer-Kent.
And I'm Rob Farrett. Governor Evers is proposing an overhaul of the corrections system in his proposed budget blueprint. He wants to turn Waupun Correctional Institution into what's called a vocational village.
This would involve overhauling the 174-year-old prison building and replacing it with new housing and job training facilities where inmates would learn skilled trades like carpentry, automotive mechanics, and welding.
The country's first of its kind vocational village program started next door to us in Ionia, Michigan. In 2016, the director of the Michigan Department of Corrections, Heidi Washington, wanted to address a workforce problem around the state.
The model has since been replicated around Michigan and in other states, and Michigan's corrections director, Heidi Washington, joins us now. Welcome to Wisconsin Today.
Thank you. It's great to be on your show.
What led you to open this style of training program for people in your care?
Well, I've been working in the Department of Corrections for about 26 years, including being a prison warden for many of those years. And I was always aware of the education programs that existed within the department. But when I became director, I really wanted to focus on a much more immersive way to deliver education and skills training. And so really wanted to provide something that not only taught high-skilled, in-demand trades, but also taught individuals what it is to be an employee, what an employer is expecting of you. And so the Vocational Village was really built around that, around being the first of its kind skilled trades training center inside of a correctional facility that provides a positive learning community for prisoners, but also teaches them what employers expect of them, which is to come to work every day and put in a full day's work. And so those are just some of the, sort of foundational components of what the Vocational Village was built on.
How do you decide who gets in, who is able to have this opportunity?
The Vocational Village is an application process. And so we're looking for individuals who are within 18 months to 2 years of their release date, so of going home. We ask them to apply and to really state to us and explain to us why they are ready to make this type of a commitment and what they hope to do with this opportunity if they're selected for the program. We also want to be sure that we are looking at what they have an interest in doing and what they have an aptitude for. And we consider all of that in their admission to the program. So we really want to be sure that we're training them in something that they have a reasonable or realistic likelihood of actually being able to achieve employment in. So Michigan's a very broad, geographically diverse state, I will say. And, we want to be sure that if you're going back to part of our state that doesn't have CNC machining, for instance, that's not the trade we're training you in. So we want to make sure that where you're going and what we train you in, there's an opportunity for you to get a job. And then once you are accepted to the Vocational Village and we've determined that you meet the criteria, you're the right security level, you don't have a significant misconduct history, then you are transferred to the Vocational Village, where part of the model is that everybody lives together in one housing unit. And so we separate the students in the Vocational Village from the rest of the individuals living at the prison. So they go to Vocational Village together, they go to their meals together, they recreate together, and they will remain like that until they are released on parole. And we've found that that is helpful in creating a supportive community within the Vocational Village.
Wow, you really create then a community that is working together, progressing together, and it sounds like there are built-in support systems there.
Right, definitely built-in support systems. They are able to go back to their housing unit after those classes are done and take their materials so that they can study. The programs that we offer, they're very intensive. I would say that they're difficult. They're challenging programs, things like CNC machining, robotics, 3D printing, for example. And a lot of them are math heavy, so there's a lot of studying that has to go into making sure that they can master all of the skills. We also have a very robust college program in the Michigan Department of Corrections. And so we often pair our college students in study halls with our Vocational Village students in the event that they need extra support in certain areas of study.
And when you track things like recidivism or the return to prison rate and employment rates for people after their release who have gone through the Village program, can you share some of the outcomes?
Sure. We do have some preliminary data. We've looked at the success of individuals overall in the Department of Corrections, in other words, the recidivism rate, compared to the success of those who have gone through the Vocational Village and completed the program and then been released. And what we have found is that the success for vocational villagers is roughly double what the success of non-vocational villagers, or I guess to put it conversely, the recidivism rate is cut in half. So recidivism overall in the state of Michigan is around 22%. And the data that we have looked at tracking the vocational villagers found that the recidivism rate of those individuals was about 12%. So it's a significant difference, meaning that these programs do make a difference. They give people the necessary skills to be able to go out and find a job and keep a job. So we're very proud of that. And employment rate would be similar. We track overall employment, and then we also track specifically for those who have completed these programs. And overall, those who have completed the Vocational Village have about a 65% employment rate on average. And so we're pretty happy with that number. We're, of course, always striving to get it even higher.
I'm curious about your partnerships with the private sector here. How have companies worked with the Vocational Village? What is their contribution to this?
First of all, without employer partners, we wouldn't be where we are. So it's obviously very necessary that we are constantly developing new relationships with potential employers because once we've trained these men and women, we want to be sure that they have a job to go to. So we have actually brought on what we call job developers in our department. And these are individuals who are working exclusively with recruiting new employers and then, working with the employers we have to set up interviews, to introduce the students, to make sure that employers know every month who's coming up for parole and what credentials they have. So, we're working with about 750 employers statewide, and we have a regular email blast that goes out to them that's introducing them to the individuals who are seeking work. And it's been just phenomenal to have so many great employers that see the value of this program. And it really has been a benefit for them because they have large demands to hire skilled people, and we have the ability to be responsive to that and to train them specifically for what employers need.
Here in Wisconsin, Governor Tony Evers is proposing a vocational village for our state. And I'm wondering, what should Wisconsin be prepared for if this goes through?
Prepare for creating a program that's transformational both inside your correctional facilities and outside. And, in addition to obviously impacting the lives of the individuals who are going through the program, it also has the ability to impact the culture of the facility where it's housed. We know from operating 3 vocational villages now that the individuals who are in this program, they're engaged, they're hopeful, they're optimistic, they are working very hard in a positive pro-social way towards their future, and they are not engaged in trouble. We don't really have any issues within the vocational villages in terms of assaults, misconducts, those types of things. So it's creating a safer environment inside prison. And then it is, creating the opportunity for employers in our state to fill open positions with very talented, skilled individuals. And then most importantly, above all, it is helping people to not return to a life of crime and not to be creating additional victims. And, that's what we're really after. When we can do that, that's when we really achieve long-term public safety for the taxpayers and the residents of our state. And hopefully we can even break the cycle of intergenerational criminal behavior and stop the next generation from coming.
Director Heidi Washington, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
That is Michigan Department of Corrections Director Heidi Washington, who opened the nation's first-of-its-kind vocational village program in 2016. Now we turn to a former participant of the program. Marcos Fernandez is president of Ideal Welding Solutions in Hudsonville, Michigan, and graduated from a vocational village in 2018. Marcos, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You had been in and out of prison, serving around 13 years in all, and you described getting out was like being hit by a brick wall. How were you able to make that brick wall disappear, and what happened?
Having a skilled trade, prior to having a skilled trade in welding, every time I got out, it was difficult to find jobs. For one, is because of the criminal record. For two, not really having no job history. So by being able to, receive the skilled trade, and actually the MDLC helping me, the Vocational Village, getting me a job prior to me getting out, gave me a head start.
What do you love about welding?
Welding and fabricating is completely different. It helps you be more creative. You got to have a creative mind to be a true fabricator. I always tell these guys, anybody can weld a bead, but only a true fabricator can understand and problem solve on how to make sure the differences, understand the differences of the metal, what the heat does to it, what it doesn't.
And you graduated from the Village program in 2018. What were the initial steps when you got out of the program?
When I got out of the program, once I graduated and prior to me being released, they already contacted employers, and they had employers come in and do like tours. So I knew I had a job getting out. So once I got out, same day I got out, I went and did a weld test with this company, and I passed the weld test, and I started that following Monday.
You didn't have to explain to that company anything, I would imagine, about your background. You just had to demonstrate your skills. You had to demonstrate your proficiency in welding. What impact did that have on you?
Well, it helped out a lot because prior to that, it's like you always have to put down your whole criminal record. You have to put down everything that you've been in there. Then you got to explain that. The impact is like it gives you more confidence because now they're just looking at you for your skills rather than what you did wrong in the past, the mistakes you made.
Fast forward to today, you're a business owner. Can you tell us about the success of your welding business?
Well, yeah. Well, my welding business, I stopped working at the last company. I just thought to myself, like, I got to start my own company. I got to take my future in my own hands. And it was a struggle. I sold my house. I went all in with my company and believing in myself. And my first year, I think I didn't do much. I did like 0 in sales. It was just getting everything going because it was difficult to even get a location. My second year after I built the company out, I was able to do 25,000 in sales. In my third year, I did 225,000 in sales. So I jumped up a lot. And by doing that, I was able to purchase another company. So now with my new company, we're doing between $75,000 to $100,000 in sales a month. So it's completely different.
Did you know you were a business entrepreneur? Did you know you had this in you?
I always knew I wanted to start a business, but I never knew what business to start. It was until I found out that I really had a niche in fabricating. Don't let me mislead anybody. It's been a struggle. But by learning and just keeping on going, just getting up every day and keeping the fight alive is what I look at. It's all about the grind. Get up every day, continue moving. You learn every day. This business is never ending.
I understand you hired a person who's gone on through the Vocational Village program. How did that feel?
It felt really great to give an opportunity back to somebody that went through the same thing. And even with him, like he went from, he worked with Ideal, my first company, and then I am hiring him through my second company. And even with him, it helped him a lot because now he can relate to somebody that's been through what he's been through. They're like really appreciative. You see the workforce out here is completely different. You know what I mean? You got, some people that never went through that struggle and some people that have. And with him, he's like very appreciative, and I just try to guide him the best I can.
You referred to that struggle, and my mind immediately went to someone who is justice involved or who has a background as an inmate. When those conversations come up with your employees, perhaps, how do you handle them?
Straightforward. Everybody knows I got a background. Everybody knows, you know what I mean? And we just try to work through it. We try to work through the problem, And, even being an inmate, and I went back to the MDLC and I spoke to the guys there, you know what I mean? And I just let them know, like, I've been where you've been at. I know what the struggle is. And at the same time, that everything can be better. If you use your skills to what you need to do, you know what I mean? You're going to be okay.
Well, seeing is believing. You have growing businesses. They can't deny that. You can't deny that. How does it feel to be a motivational speaker to them?
I just thought to myself, as long as, if I can reach out to one person, And I think that would be great. When you're speaking, you can see the facial expressions to the people. So some people, like even in the beginning, some people are like, yeah, whatever. Like, who's this guy? But I think at that point, this one guy that I was actually incarcerated with, he stood up and he was like, I know a lot of you probably don't believe, but I sat right here on the bench with him. And he explained to me exactly what he was going to go do. He was like, the business model changed, because I was looking at that point as a mobile welding company. He was like, but the business model changed to him doing fabricating and machining. He was like, but his dream was still the same. He was like, so I can actually say, like, I was here with him, and me actually seeing guys I was locked up with and coming back to see them again. It was, it was a wonderful feeling that actually to speak to them and just let them know, like, look, if I can do it, anybody can do it.
Marcos, thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Marcos Fernandez is president of Ideal Welding Solutions. It's a metal fabricator in Hudsonville, Michigan. He graduated from a Michigan Vocational Village program in 2018. And earlier, we spoke with the director of the Michigan Department of Corrections, Heidi Washington, who opened the nation's first-of-its-kind Vocational Village program in Ionia, Michigan in 2016. Governor Tony Evers is proposing a vocational village model for the Waupun prison as part of an overhaul of the prison system in his new 2-year budget proposal. The program in Waupun would focus on expanding job training.
Still ahead on Wisconsin Today, the group Trans on the Land connects LGBTQ plus people in rural areas.
A lot of what we do is potlucks, just going around to each other's homes. But we also do foraging walks where we all go to a local park and work on identification and sometimes harvesting.
Finding fellowship in the Driftless area, that's next from WPR News.
It's Wisconsin Today. I'm Kate Archer-Kent.
And I'm Rob Farrett. Hawthorne McCracken grew up in Appalachia as a self-described country mouse. They've always felt more at home in rural areas like the Driftless region of Wisconsin, where they now live.
As a trans person, McCracken hasn't always found the support that they needed living in rural areas. So they founded the social group Trans on the Land to help connect LGBTQ plus people in this sparsely populated area of the state. Producer Joe Tarr spoke to McCracken at this year's Marble Seed Organic Farming Conference in La Crosse.
My name is Hawthorne McCracken. I live in DeSoto, Wisconsin, but I was born and raised in East Tennessee, outside of Johnson City. My father was a dairy farmer, Les McCracken. He had a very highly awarded herd of registered Holsteins in East Tennessee and fell in love with Wisconsin. He came up for the World Dairy Expo just about every year and tried to move up here and make it work. But due to financial reasons, Reaganomics, the farm kind of fell through. And so he ended up becoming a cattle broker for other farmers for the last half of his life. And then my mother's family had a greenhouse through which they sold plant starts and a lot of flowers. So both sides of my family have a lot of connection to agriculture. I always say it's funny, like my dad was a farmer, my mother was a public school teacher, and now my day job, which is unconnected from the queer farming work that I do, but is in farm to school. So I kind of meshed those two worlds. Yeah. I've stayed ag adjacent for a while.
So tell me about the group that you're involved with, Trans on the Land.
I have a chronic problem of starting social organizations to find friends because that's who I am. That's the only way I know how to find buddies as a grown-up. And so the group I founded is called Trans on the Land. We are not a nonprofit. We are not officially organized in any manner, but that's the name I came up with for our cute little logo. And it was actually inspired by the Soil Sisters, which is a group through Wisconsin Farmers Union, of which I was a member for, well, I'm still a member, but was a member for a long time. And they were super supportive in my growth and my learning and my career. So a big shout out to those folks. But so I was seeing the growth of a lot of women in agriculture groups and really loved my time spent in the Soil Sisters. They were always welcoming despite, whatever gender identity, and just loved that it was such a different environment from traditional agriculture circles. They would have potlucks and get together and really share like the down and dirty details of what it took for them to run their farms. And so I really appreciated that social environment. And I wanted to create something for trans and non-binary people who were also interested in not just farming, but foraging. And it's kind of just become living rurally. It's honestly become a little social club for folks who live in my rural area, because it's really tough to be queer and especially trans in a rural area. And, where we're at, we're quite scattered in the driftless. And, we've got a small local town where there's a decent amount of culture. It's really nice, but it's definitely not the same as even being in La Crosse, much less Madison or Milwaukee, where you can just, go down the road to the LGBT center and, hang out and do programming. A lot of what we do is potlucks, just going around to each other's homes. But we also do foraging walks where we all go to a local park and work on identification and sometimes harvesting where it's allowed. And we have done some skill shares before. One of our members does mushroom growing, and so we helped them to set up some straw blocks for their mushroom production. We table at our local pride, and so about a month before that, we'll come together and have a big art day where we all make like block prints or patches and everything together. And especially through the last year and through all of the political upheavals that have been happening lately, it has really just become a place of emotional and social support for people. And it has evolved into this really amazing community that I'm so eternally grateful for being able to find these people, because I had some health issues that are ongoing, but were really bad last year. And that community just held me through it. I would not have been able to make it without those folks. And so it's just been invaluable to me because, I live 30 minutes from the nearest grocery store, but I still have like a solid group of people that I can just send a text out to our group chat and be like, hey guys, like it's a really shitty day. And 3 or 4 people will get back to me immediately. Yeah. And that's astounding for someone who has only lived in the rural area I've lived in for 3 years, because it's hard to bust in to rural social groups. It's very insular.
Tell me about the experience of trans people in rural areas.
I definitely can't speak for all trans people living rurally. And I think we are lucky living in the driftless area of Wisconsin. We have a relatively progressive pocket of folks. It's very politically patchwork and diverse where we live, but the small town that we're near is relatively progressive. But it can be really isolating. It's especially difficult to find affirming healthcare. Like, honestly, through most of my experiences with doctors and official paperwork and stuff, I just get gendered as a woman. And I just kind of go with it because it's not worth arguing every single time I have to go and get prescriptions refilled, And some other friends of mine I know, like, people still drive to Madison to get healthcare, and it's 2.5 hours away for us. Again, socially, I think we're very lucky, and something that I am hoping we do more of and is being like really important to me, especially with all these political shifts, is just being able to be visible in our community. Tabling at Pride is a huge thing for us, as well as reaching out to families of queer youth and trans youth especially. Because growing up in East Tennessee, I did not have any queer role models. I did not know any older queers. I know they're out there. I grew up in, outside of Johnson City, moved up here and learned in college that apparently Johnson City is like a very queer scene, which I never knew because I was stuck in Bible camp. Yeah. So being able to just be a visible example and to show the queer youth in our area, like, you don't have to move away. you can still live in the country. You can still follow your, whatever dream you have if you want to go into farming or just to stay in this beautiful landscape and be yourself, because the age demographics and the financial demographics for our area are kind of rough sometimes. There's a big gap between people who have moved into the area from large cities and have that big city income and the people who grew up there, or like, everyone thinks I'm a Madison transplant. I'm not. I've lived in the country my whole life. I just really like the Driftless because it reminds me of Tennessee. So I'm still a country mouse. But the income difference between people who have grown up there and just, work at the local Tractor Supply versus the Chicago, Madison, Minneapolis retirees who come down here with pensions and spend money on whatever, is a lot. And so revitalizing our rural areas and really having a place for youth to land and stay and be their true selves is really important to me.
Describe for me like what it is you like about living in rural areas, the Driftless in particular.
Yeah. Well, first I will say this is a pet peeve of mine. I don't think there's anything purer or better or inherently more human about living in rural areas versus urban. Some urban areas have just as much nature as rural areas, and some of them are even more diverse if you consider rural areas that are monocropped. So I want to put that there. But for me, a lot of it's about the sensory experience. Honestly, I'm very sensitive. It's quiet, and I don't have to worry about sirens going off at 2 a.m. usually. If they do, then the whole neighborhood's out there. And I appreciate the freedom to be unobserved and just be in, a less densely populated area. And at least the Driftless especially is very ecologically diverse. And so being able to walk out my front door and see different species of plants and animals and fungi is really important to me. And like I say, growing up in the Blue Ridge of East Tennessee, I felt like the mountains were like, they really held you. And so I lived down in Rock County, Wisconsin for a while, and it's corn country. It's very flat. I can't deal with a flat horizon. I feel like the tornadoes are going to come and get me. So being able to come to the Driftless and see an ecoregion that's actually very similar to Appalachia and shares a lot of geological similarities was amazing. And I feel like I've sort of been able to translate that sense of homemaking. And again, being able to find this queer community has turned it into the kind of home that I could not have imagined having as a young person in Tennessee.
So could you talk about your gender identity and how it has evolved over your life?
I guess the most commonly known word for my gender identity would be non-binary. I don't know. Gender's all wibbly wobbly and it shifts almost constantly. I hate that narrative of I always knew. I didn't always know. I always felt a little off. Playing girl felt like playing dress up to me. I started experimenting with outward gender expression when I was a very young teenager. It's like cutting my hair, stealing my brother's clothes. But I didn't really have the words for it until I was in college. And I've actually come out twice. I tried to come out as non-binary in 2011 due to just complete lack of social acceptance and honestly a couple of people laughing in my face because of the shape of my body at the time. I ended up going back into girl mode for a while and just sort of accepting like, well, this is always how people are going to see me. And then back in 2018, I tried again. I had a really hard time coming out to my current partner because I was scared of that same reaction. And I mean, he's a total sweetheart. That did not happen. And I had never thought about physical transition until I started talking to other trans adults and seeing people who had been through these experiences and were just so happy in their life. And I had a friend of mine that I call my my transition guru because they had already done it, and I could see in them like the effects of gender affirming medical treatment, and decided, okay, I think I want to try that for myself. And then it took me a couple of years to do some soul searching and figure out exactly what I wanted from medical transition.
The Trump administration is very hostile to trans people. How do you feel about this political moment and where we're heading?
That's a good question. And I want to acknowledge that I am a white person. I am a settler on stolen land, and the majority of our members similarly have that privilege. But just speaking on how I feel, and my personal reaction to the situation, I feel angry and spiteful, I think is the word, defiant. My first reaction has been, okay, like, let's go. Let's do it, man, because we are out here creating joyful, beautiful, sacred community. And the people who are trying to tear down trans people, what is your perception of beauty? What is your perception of joy? Like, how are you living your life if you're spending so much time tearing down other people and attacking people for things that are not affecting you at all? And so for me, the most important thing that we can do in the face of that hate is to celebrate the beauty of who we are and to celebrate queer joy and trans joy as loud as we can. And we've been doing a lot of art making, make art, plant seeds, and stand in defiance of that. It's just, I'm kind of just sick of it, man. We're just trying to be human beings and do human things, be in community, make art, grow food, and love each other.
So what is your advice to someone growing up who feels different and feels like they need to move out of their small town?
It's a tough one, and I think it really depends on where you're growing up. Because where I was really isolated. Like, we had 2 other families on our street, and that was it. And my social circle consisted of my parents' church friends. So even as an older teenager, thinking about like going out, trying to socialize on my own and trying to find my people would be really intimidating. But I would say, like, don't give up on it. Like, keep trying to find your people because they're out there. And maybe you do have to move, but you don't always have to move to a big city if you don't want to. If you do, great, go for it. I'm not the boss of anybody. But it's taken me a couple of tries and a lot of failing to really find my social niche. And life isn't over when you're 20. Life isn't over when you're 30 or 50 or 75. And I would just say, like, there are people out there who share your passions. There are people out there who see the world in a similar way as you, or who see the world in a way that's going to challenge you in an awesome way and help you grow into a better person. Keep looking for those points of connection. And even as progressive people, even as queer people, don't let your assumptions about someone shape how you're approaching them socially. Because I have a buddy who's trans, who loves to go into like their local small town bar and just talk to the farmer guys there. And it's the kind of social interaction, it's like the last people you think would be friends, but they end up connecting because they've lived rurally their whole life. They have a lot in common. And so, of course, personal safety in mind as well, and knowing your area and knowing who's going to be safe to approach for you. But don't discount those connections with your neighbors, even if they're not queer. Put your flag out if you feel safe, and you might be surprised at the number of folks who come out of the hills, come out of the woodwork to see what you're into.
Hawthorne McCracken is a trans person living in the Driftless area and the founder of Trans on the Land. Producer Joe Tarr spoke to McCracken at this year's Marble Seed Organic Farming Conference in La Crosse.
Springtime is busy for CSAs as planting gets underway and subscription plans start to open up for the growing season.
We'd like to get your thoughts on these community-supported agriculture programs. Do you subscribe to a CSA? Do you want to give a shout out to a farmer? What's been the most unusual item in a produce box, and how did you prepare it?
Okay, Rob, do you have a memory of a CSA box?
I do. We used to have a friend who was a farmer, small, only 6 or 8 shares. He'd give us a little more green beans, a little less of the stuff we didn't like. Lovage. I tried to like it. It turned out Lori Skelton here at WPR would always take any of that weird lovage. Fennel, I think she took from me as well. So it found a home.
Share your CSA story, and we may include it in a future program. Email us at wisconsintoday@wpr.org, or you can call or text to get in touch. That number is 888-642-0232. That's 888-642-0232.
Wisconsin Today is the work of a team of producers, hosts, and technical directors. Learn more about us at WPR.org/Wisconsin Today. I'm Rob Farrett.
And I'm Kate Archer-Kent. You're listening to WPR News.